We're here today at the site of the Three Sisters in Ellesmere Park off Rutland Road. We've come to interview the residents and Rebecca Long Bailey about the proposed United Utilities storm tank stroke septic tank, whatever they wish to call it. But the more disagreeable point is their plans to demolish 17 trees, flatten this area of natural beauty behind me, which hosts newts, bats, various wildlife, etc. And to me it's shocking, it's disgraceful actually. Rebecca, we're here today at Rutland Road, site of the Three Sisters. It's the proposed controversial United Utilities storm tank that we're proposing building.
It's a sewer tank, as we understand it, and it's quite big, and it covers the kind of whole expanse of the front of Three Sisters. Yeah. And then the bit that's part of the planning application are the pipes that are going to come out of the ground, and the little box that's going to be on the top. And residents don't dispute the fact that we need to have these drains to stop properties from being flooded. But this is a nature reserve and we need to protect it, and as you can see, you know, it's a fantastic place where people bring their families, but it's teeming with wildlife as well, and it's one of the few semi-protected green spaces that we've got in Salford, so it's so important to protect it. So what we've asked United Utilities to do is to treat this as if it was built upon. If it had houses on it, they'd have to find options elsewhere. They'd have to look at putting drains under the road, which is what they've done in other parts of Ellesmere Park. So we want them to consider those options and not the cheapest, easiest option, which is going to damage wildlife and get rid of trees and shrubbery here.
Is there a plan B for United Utilities?
There's a few options that they've considered that we've seen in an optioneering report, but it's certainly not as extensive as residents would have liked. I mean, one example that's been put forward by local engineers is the junction of Rutland Road and Westminster Road and Victoria Road as another option to put tanks in. Another option is to put a number of smaller tanks in instead of the massive tank that they're planning in Three Sisters, and they've done that already on places like Stafford Road previously, so it is possible. And we know that if this was, you know, built upon and it was a more urban environment, they'd have to look at those other options. So that's all we want them to do really. We know that they've got the power under permitted development to go ahead with most of this, apart from the bit that's the subject of the planning application. We just want them to take their environmental and social responsibility seriously really.
Finally, with Salford Council owning the land, would they have a major sway on this?
They will. Planning is a quasi-judicial function, so theoretically it's not a political decision. The people who are on the planning panel have to judge it by a load of different measures which are quite legal, but that only applies to that small part that's part of the planning application, which is the box that's going to sit over the ground and the pipe. Anything else that's under the ground, United Utilities have a right to do that anyway, whether the council's happy with it or not. They don't need planning permission for it, and that's why this is such a huge issue, because we know they've got the right to do most of it. We don't want them to, and we want them to take that responsibility that they've got to the environment and to the community more seriously.
Finally, to say, in my opinion, they seem to have gone a bit roughshod, haven't they, with the 17 trees, taking into account the biodiversity of the land, etc. Have you done a proper feasible study of the ground, do you think?
Well, there's an environmental report, an ecology report, and it's very kind of broad brush. It doesn't go into any detail really about bats, and we've heard reports that there are bats roosting in some of the trees. It also doesn't cover the issue of this species called the great crested newt, which you probably hear about in planning applications. They're a protected species, and we've got residents that have seen them at the site and taken photos of them, I understand. So we want to see a far more detailed environmental report. But all of that aside, this is a nature reserve, and even if those protected species weren't there, or weren't found to be there, they shouldn't be putting any kind of development plans on a nature reserve like this.
That's great. What do you think of the turnout?
It's brilliant, isn't it?
Stephen, you're a lifelong resident of Ellesmere Park, I've been told.
Yeah.
We're here today obviously to discuss the proposed plans from United Utilities. What's your views on this?
Well, I think the first question is, what's the justification? Why do they need to be doing it? They assert that there's a flooding risk, and if there is, yes, it has to be resolved. But we believe it only covers about 11 houses, and we think half of them are objecting to it. So We don't understand why it has to be done here. It's a very large piece of mature woodland that's is a local nature reserve, has got lots of biodiversity, and they seem to be wanting to flatten the trees of a large section of it to build a 9-metre tank. Normally that type of thing would be put in the centre of the road. They've apparently done some options, but they're not discussing the options with anybody. They're just asserting this is the best place to put it. Whereas they could deliver other options, either in the road or in other locations. We understand that works of this nature are going to have a disruption on the local people and roads around, and possibly have road closures. A lot of people would prefer them to do that than flatten this lot just for a 9-metre tank. It's not the 9-metre tank that is as much as the problem as the removal of the trees to build a car park for the staff to come and put a temporary solution, which just seems ridiculous. Nobody seems to be valuing the trees. I think you could estimate, I've seen estimates that put a value on a tree of 50 years, which these are at least, and that would be £1.3 million. It's a bit of an artificial figure, I agree, but it gives some idea. If you gave UU 1.3 million, could they build it somewhere else, please? We're looking to the local council to protect their own land. This is on their land. They could presumably stop it tomorrow by saying no. Local councillors are verbally very supportive, but we are yet to see action that actually puts some of that support to prevent this being used as a car park stroke storage area for a bulldozer.
Hey, look at logistically, it's a no-no, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's a site of site of biological interest and a local nature reserve, and they're talking in restoration to plant some relatively very small trees, which for another 50 years it won't be anything like it is today. That's 50 years where people could enjoy this.
Do we know if United Utilities have got a plan B or another option to fall back on?
They have mentioned they've looked at other options, but they use the term as unconstructable. Now, what exactly that means, because they construct this type of tank under the road all the time, and all they've looked at are green spaces, and the options that we have seen all seem to be uphill. I'm no engineer, but if you're going to do water flow, I'd expect it to be downhill. So I don't think they've looked at it seriously. There are lots of sites around here, both under Salford's control and the local authorities and UU's control. They owned land on the other side of this, which they've recently sold for housing. So they could potentially put stuff there.
Well, if it's anything to go by the public sway of today's meeting with all these people and what Rebecca Long Bailey told me, they've had a record number of complaints. I think.
Oh, that's good to hear. I haven't had the latest figures. I know we've had over 400 complaints to the local authority, but that's purely for the planning permission. And really, the planning permission is only a small part because it's only for a box and a stick. And to tell the truth, at the end of the day, that's not a big pile of beans. But it's the construction of the whole and also the demolishing of all this for a car park that makes it ridiculous. It's disproportionate to what they're having to do, and is it required? If we accept that it is, then please do it somewhere else.